Join us on Paranormal M for tales that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Subscribe now and stay tuned for mysteries that'll captivate your soul. Get ready to uncover the unknown. Sleep Cycle App Recording. I haven't posted here in a very long time, but this calls for a post. I use the app Sleep Cycle every night to track my sleep. If you're familiar with the app, you know that it records every sound that occurs during sleep, like snoring and sleep talking. The app also automatically labels each sound and is pretty accurate each time. Recently, I've been giggling in my sleep, which is honestly kind of embarrassing, but also amusing. But Sleep Cycle always labels this as just sleep talking. This morning I woke up at I had 6 recordings, and most of them were of myself just breathing a little bit heavier. However, there was one recording that was just labeled talking, which I've never seen before. I listened to it and I was immediately horrified. I could make out multiple voices in my room, and one of them was a male's voice. I'm 100% sure that no one has access to my apartment. I even have an application on my phone that connects to the electric lock on my door and alerts me whenever my door is locked or unlocked, whether automatically or manually. The last time my lock was messed with was when I locked it at 7:20 p.m. last night. This recording was taken at 2:41 a.m. this morning. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to even post the recording, but I'll try if anybody wants to listen. Let me know what they think. I'm not really sure what to do in my situation, but if anybody has any advice on what to do, please comment. Please help. I'm actually afraid to sleep in my apartment tonight. I wish I could hear that. The Conjuring experience before it was released. Alright, so I'm new here, but after seeing a few posts, I wanted to share a story of mine. I have multiple. I come from a very religious family. My mother is especially religious, but comes from a childhood of turmoil and torment. I am also religious, but not in the same way that she is. I think she often uses religion to try and let go of the past that she was forced to live. I also think that she carries baggage and negative spirits with her that have set up camp in our household. I absolutely believe in the spirit world. That's because I've experienced it many times. It was the middle of the school year, and I was around 13 years old. I was lying in my bed texting people on my LG ENV3 before I fell asleep. I decided I'd put my phone down and try to get some rest before the next morning. At the time, I'd leave my bedroom door open and turn my mother's bedroom light on. I've always been afraid of the dark, even now. My mother and 2 cats were the only other household members home at the time, and they were all downstairs watching TV. Shortly after I closed my eyes, I heard someone clap twice in my mother's bedroom, and immediately I froze in terror. It was someone other than my mother and 2 cats inside the house. I called my mother on her phone so as not to alert the intruder and told her that there was someone else in the house. She said, "Sweetie, no one's in the house besides us. The alarm's on, and it's been on for hours." I begged her to come check her room and alleviate my fears. She finally agreed. She checked everywhere in her room, under the bed, in the closet, in the master bathroom. But she was correct. No one was in the house besides us. From that night forward, I slept with my door closed. Fast forward 1 year. I'm again alone in my bedroom, but this time with the door shut and my lights completely turned off. I had overcome my fear of the dark and decided that maybe the clapping I had heard from my mother's room a year ago was just a figment of my imagination. I had moved my twin-sized bed off of its frame and onto the floor under the larger window at the rear of my room. It was again the middle of the school year. I needed to get my rest for the next morning. As I was attempting to drift off, I heard the same 2 claps I heard the year prior. This time, the claps were directly beside my head on the floor next to me. I didn't call for my mother, and I did not move. I laid there completely frozen. I don't remember when I finally drifted off or if I was even able to, but I haven't encountered those claps again in the past 9 years. My first experience: disembodied steps, shadow figure, touching. This happened a mere hour ago. This morning around 3:40 a.m., and I've always been attracted to ghost stories and things dealing with the paranormal. To be honest, though, I've never really given them much stock and usually chalk it up to bad plumbing or sleep paralysis, mind tricks, or some other quick explanation. I've liked the idea of going ghost hunting, if only to prove it to myself that there isn't anything to it, and if there is, it's a scientific endeavor that needs to be studied. I'm currently staying in a hotel room for work. I've been in this same room since August, never had any weird feelings, or unexplainable noises, or really anything of the sort. This morning, I was awoken to the sound of squishy, wet boots walking down the hall outside my room. Except I came to realize the sound of the squishy stepping boots appeared to be walking on tile and stopped somewhere in the vicinity of my room. This confused the hell out of me, since the hall is carpet and the only tile is in my bathroom and kitchenette area right by the door. At this point, I'm alarmed that somebody's in my room, so I sit up to look toward the door and see if I spot anyone. This room sucks for sleeping in darkness. That's because the 2-inch gap under the door lets in quite a bit of light, which reflects off the stainless steel fridge by the door. I'm looking and hoping not to see anyone. Then I spot a shadowy area by the fridge and counter. I think it's odd, but just my eyes adjusting. So I focus at this area, and almost instantly a tall black figure facing the wall and leaning over the countertop by my fridge comes into view. For lack of a better word, this thing actually materialized before my eyes. I'm shocked, and by black, I mean Vanta black. That's the blackest black. I even noticed the light being reflected from the gap in the door off the fridge was blocked by this standing mass. I looked to the bedside lamp, back to the figure, back to the lamp, turn it on, nothing but the most unsettling feeling I've ever felt. I jump up and I dash toward the bathroom to make sure someone wasn't in the room at this point. Every hair in my body is standing on end. So I move back to bed, leaving the light on, of course. I try to calm down since realizing the time and having to be up for work in a few hours. I'm not really working, but I roll over facing away from the door. This part, I'm not sure if it was my nerves or overactive imagination or what, but I begin to feel something in the area of my hip and leg. Almost like an electrical pressure. Pressure being too strong a word, but that's all I can describe it as. Static-like, feather-light pressure. I sort of feel this feeling in my stomach, and I roll over and sit up, and I've been up since. I tried browsing Reddit and watching TV and eventually just gave up on sleep. This was nuts. I even thought about pulling my audio recorder out and attempting an EVP session, but I was too freaked out in the moment. I've never experienced anything like this before. I plan on asking the staff if they have any ghost stories or heard anything like that happening there. It's just a chain hotel, nothing special about it, but apparently there's something else to it. As a side note, I was on the phone with my wife last week when I walked into the bathroom to a random puddle of water in the center of the room for no apparent reason or no source. Toilet, shower, AC vents were all checked, but just chalked it up to not noticing I got the floor wet. Never really came up with a good explanation for that one, but after this squishy, booted shadow person, I'm even less sure. The Denim Man sightings. Growing up, I wasn't told much about my family's past. Even now, I only know a small bit. However, over time, I learned about the quote-unquote ghosts that followed my family. Now, I don't know much. I was just curious about whether anyone else had any similar experiences or knew anything. Before I was born, I had a stillborn sister who we called Benny as a nickname. Benny was originally thought to be a boy by doctors and medical professionals. That's why she's called Benny. The first experience that I ever had was at my grandmother's house, which is a place I still live on weekends. When I was exactly 1 month old, I was taking a nap. My mother heard someone singing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" on the baby monitor that was in my room. But when they investigated, no one was there. And something else I just noticed, this subreddit was created on that exact day, July 10th, 2008, my 1 month birthday. I have a memory from when I was a child, that while I was laying in my bed at night, I was woken up by a man walking in the hallway. A tall shadow figure. The classic horror story thing, I know, but that was the only memory I have from, anything having to do with a humanoid. When I was a little bit older, I was at my grandmother's house, and everyone else was out of the house at that time at a shop. So I'm left alone to play. My first time left alone at home, so I'm pretty proud of myself, actually. I was playing with toys on the floor, and I saw a cat walking around in the room I was in. This incident occurred just a couple of weeks after her cat died, a cat which I was extremely close to growing up. When I told my mother and grandmother, they told me I was simply imagining things and making it up. I was also told that as a child there was a ghost which I described as a Mario ghost. No idea what that means, but if anybody has any similar experiences, tell me. Perhaps it's a ghost that moves when you don't look at it, and when you look at it, it freezes. As I got older, I was told a few more things. There was a ghost in the house that had been following my mother for years since she was little. The ghost wore all denim clothes and a denim hat. It had been spotted walking around the house they used to live in. In that house, things would be knocked off of shelves, but nothing aggressive or intended to hurt someone. The denim man was also spotted by my mother's friends in a bar, but I know only a small bit about that. As well as that, things go missing, and all you have to do is ask for them back, and you'll find them a little while later. It sounds stupid, I know, but it's crazy. All you do is say, "Can I have that back?" And it returns to wherever you've checked. So, if anybody knows why this is happening or anything like that, it'd be interesting to know. Or if somebody knows if I can make them interact with me at all, please tell me. This happened a while ago, but I saw a recent post that was a similar experience. Several years ago, I lost my father. He and I were very close, as were my kids, his grandchildren. We stayed in El Paso, Texas. That's when my sibling had left Texas, and we were part of the family that were with him and my mom almost daily in EPTX. After he passed away, my second oldest child, my son, had a car accident. As a result of this accident, my son had and still has a TBI. He was in a coma for a month, then came out of that coma but remained in a minimally conscious state for another 1.5 years. It was Ritalin that actually brought my son out of his minimally conscious state to where he could speak again. Whoa. It had been well over 2 years after my son's accident. He was inpatient at TIRR in Houston. He was there for therapy after he had shown signs of following commands and was started on Ritalin shortly after being admitted to TIRR. About 1 week after he started Ritalin, one day we were riding up the elevator after a day of therapy, and as clear as day my son asked me, What happened to me? I quickly pulled him off the elevator as I heard this, and it had been a long time since my son had spoken. I was in shock. I was ecstatic. I was crying with joy. I pushed him into a waiting area and told him about his accident, about how he had fallen asleep at the wheel and left the roadway and hit 2 parked U-Haul trailers at full speed. It was a miracle he was alive. I mentioned that my dad must have called in every favor in heaven that he could to get my son this far. When I said this to my son, his eyes got wide and he asked me, "What happened to Grandpa?" It broke my heart to realize that due to the brain injuries my son had endured, he'd forgotten that my dad, his grandfather, had passed away. That memory had to be one that was lost to my son as a result of the damage to his brain. To tell him this and to see him break down and cry, suffering this loss all over again, was just so heartbreaking. Eventually, he was better, and as time went on, at TIRR, he did well in his therapies. One night while still at TIRR, I had a dream. My father came to me in my dream, and he told me that he was proud of me for all the sacrifices I'd made to be there for my son, telling me I was a good father for being with him at every step along the way to his healing, and to tell him that he, my son, could get it all back. But then it was going to be a fight for his life. The thing he said in that dream was to tell my son to stay strong. It was a powerful dream, and it seemed so real. I told my son about it that morning when he awoke. Not long after that, my dad came back to me again. He was sitting next to me in this dream. His right hand on my shoulder, he was telling me something, but I was having trouble understanding him. It was almost as if he was having trouble speaking. I told him in this dream, "Dad, I'm having trouble understanding you. Is there something wrong? Why are you talking like that?" He looked at me and mouthed the word sorry. He then very slowly said, "I forget that where I am at now, I don't need to use my mouth to speak. This all feels so strange now, and it's hard to speak like I used to. I only wanted to tell you that I love you. I'm proud of you, and I'm happy that you're here with me. I'm going to be watching you too. I can't say for how long, only for as long as I'm able and allowed. Please remind him that he has to fight now, harder than ever. Tell him again to keep strong." I don't know if these visits from my dad were just dreams, but I chose not to think so. It all felt too real and yet surreal at the same time. But his visits came to me at dark times and were sorely needed. I believe there's more to this world, more than we ever get to know and see. One day, I hope to see him again. Miss you, Pops. Has anyone else had a ghost take on the form of something else? I lived in a super haunted house for almost 10 years. One of the ghosts was super mean. My oldest son is traumatized from things that he experienced there, stuff he didn't tell me about until we moved. I hardly talked about it. I was worried I was going crazy, until we moved and everything that's happened stopped. Just stopped. But when we lived there, the activity was so constant. Got to the point where it was just irritating. It was like constant jump scares in a movie, you know. After a while, it just lost its edge. One of the things the ghost would do is climb into the bed with me. I'd be laying in the bed and I'd hear the slap of a hand hitting the top of the covers. I'd feel the mattress shake and the weight of someone pulling themselves up onto the bed. Then I'd look and no one would be there. Happened all the time. But toward the end of us living there, after talking a lot about how much the ring and the grudge scare me, I was taking a nap and felt someone climb into the bed. I just knew no one would be there. I knew my husband was downstairs and my kids were watching a show. I couldn't help it. I rolled over and I looked. I saw a girl towering over me with a dirty white dress and long, dirty black hair covering her face. I jumped, then rolled away, covering my face with my blanket, then groaned and yelled, "Go away!" Sounds absurd, but it totally happened. And it did something like this to my oldest son, too, after he saw something on a show that scared him. I was just wondering if anything like this has happened to anyone else. What kind of entity is this? I'm thinking it has to be demonic, but there's so much I just don't know about these things. Childhood experience. Thought I was crazy until my mom confirms years later. When I was about 7 years old, my family moved to this old house. The day we moved in, I was holding a snow globe because it was fragile and special to me. I didn't want it to break in one of the many moving boxes. While walking to the house holding it, I remember thinking, I wonder what the snow feels like in the globe. Before I finished the full thought, it shattered my hands. When I told my mom this, she didn't believe me. She thought I just dropped it. This was the first thing that scared me about this house. The bigger concern is what I kept seeing. This house had a large backyard, and behind her fence was train tracks. My room faced them, and every so often I'd see a shadow of a man just standing there. When I went to get my brothers to look, he'd be gone. There was one night I was woken up to a strange, repetitive sound. I slowly turned my body to face the room. There I see a shadow man sitting on my floor. He sits cross-legged, and one hand there is a piece of wood, the other's a knife. He sits there whittling. I remember tears forming in my eyes. I'm scared and I don't know what'll happen to me. I don't want to scream in fear. He'll hurt me before my parents could help me. I close my eyes tight. I'm not sure how long I stay awake, but eventually the whittling is like white noise and I fall back to sleep. When I wake up, I see wood chips on my floor. I run to my mom and I tell her what happened last night. She told me it was a bad dream. I show her all the wood chips on the floor. She makes some excuse, maybe the dog brought it in. She doesn't really believe me at all. Over time, I think maybe she's right. This is crazy. I'm crazy. I just let it go. A few months later, we move. Years later, I'm an adult now, and my mom brings up that house. I told her I hated that house and it scared me. She says that she knows that's why we only lived there for under a year. She finally admitted that she also had encounters there, and when I had my encounter, she knew it was time for us to leave. She didn't want to scare me and thought it was better me not knowing. Well, it was better me not knowing I'm able to connect with ghosts and spirits like her. I'm unsure what intentions that spirit had, good or bad. For years, I felt alone and crazy. At least now I'm able to talk to my mom freely about my experience. Why do I still dream about my old home? So a house I had lived in from the age of 9 to about 16 was haunted, I'm fairly sure. Things happened all the time. I always felt watched when I was on the second floor. Noises would come from nowhere up there. My brother's room always just felt off. He was about 5 or 6 at the time, and through the course of the whole time we lived there, he'd flat out refused to sleep in his room. He'd always wake up at night and go downstairs wailing. Not to mention, when we moved in, my parents said that 666 was painted on my bedroom wall, and no matter how many coats of pink paint they put over it, it still bled through like it was freshly painted there. So that's cool too. You need primer. So the dreams. I used to argue that it was just the fact that I'd lived there during such a formative chunk of life. So my background in my dreams would always be set there. The thing is, whenever I'm dreaming of that place, I'm always searching for someone or something. I had a dog that died when we lived there, and sometimes I dream that I'm trying to find her. Though I have the knowledge she's gone, and that she's in our yard rotting. I don't know why. If I'm not searching for her, I'm making my way to the stairs that lead to the second floor. We had a blanket blocking the stairway because we used it so little that my parents didn't want all of our heat to go upstairs and leave us cold. With each dream, I'm getting closer to the blanket, and dread is in my stomach. Like I know the minute I move it, somebody will be at the top of the stairs looking down at me. I finally reached the blanket, and to my relief, when I moved it, no one was there. But the relief was short because the very last dream I've had is that I moved the blanket and the door to my bedroom, which you can see about half the door from the bottom of the stairs, slowly begins to open. I haven't seen who or what is opening the door, and honestly, I'm scared to see. I don't know why I'm having these dreams and why they're so realistic and exactly the same, each with me going a bit further. Perhaps the scariest part of it all is that I'm not even scared of that house anymore. I miss it. I feel so much homesickness for it now. I used to never want to go back once I had moved out. I'm beginning to have thoughts of asking the landlords to let me know when it's vacant again so I can have it. I feel almost jealous that people are living in it right now. I don't even live in that town anymore. I don't know if anybody will take this seriously or even knows why I feel this way or why I'm having these dreams. But does anybody else have something similar happening to them? And what do I do? My baby boy has a friend. My family on my mother's side has always been close to the paranormal. I myself have had many experiences with spirits, ghosts, and entities, etc. It would seem that I've passed these traits on to my 11-month-old boy. For about a month, whenever he's been put to bed at night, we've noticed that he tends to be more talkative than, well, when he's with us. Not to say that he's a quiet kid, but sometimes when he's in there alone, he just yaps up a storm. The times that I've peeked in his door to see what he's going on about, he's always facing a wall, and it's obvious that he's communicating with someone or something. It's actually really cute. There are pauses as if he's listening. Then the baby babble starts, and man does it start. Sometimes he bursts out laughing and giggling after the pauses, almost like he's playing with someone. I love the sound of his laughter, so I can't help but smile when I hear it. Once after his afternoon nap, I went in and picked him up, and thanks to my bad back, I had to put my hand on the wall to steady myself. I was looking at him the whole time, even though he was looking at the spot I had to put my hand on. He looked at me, he looked at my hand, and back at me and erupted in wails like I'd hurt him somehow. I asked him what was wrong, and he motioned toward my hand. He was crying while he did so. When I realized I may have just put my hand on his quote-unquote friend, I quickly moved it and apologized both to my boy and his visitor. Needless to say, he instantly calmed down and went about her day. My girlfriend was skeptical about the whole thing. She's not really a believer in the supernatural. But even she's been noticing how he acts and has become a believer too, more or less. Dream night before Mother's death. My mother passed away shortly after Christmas last year. The night before her death, I had a weird dream. My uncle, who died at 74, was in the dream, and he was a very young man, late teens. We were in a house, and I was talking to the redhead actress from Longmire. My mother was a tall, lanky redhead like that. I was in the kitchen with my uncle, and outside my grandmother was gardening. She was his and my mother's mother. She helped raise me. My grandmother waved me all through a cloudy glass. It was like hand-blown glass, wavy and imperfect, so she was blurry. But I could tell she had her younger figure and black hair. I was talking to my uncle when he put a finger to the side of my head. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm fixing you." There was a bright golden light and I woke up. I woke up feeling very good, very calm. When my wife woke up, I immediately told her about the dream. I then told my adult son, who was curious about the dream because he had a weird but unrelated dream that night as well. That afternoon, my brother called and told her mother had died in her sleep that night. I have a lot of curiosity about this dream. My mother was ill, but she wasn't terminal. Was it my subconscious, or was it something more? Was it a deeper experience than just a simple subconscious program? I found myself seeking God in the months since then, struggling to stoke the fire of faith that I had long ago. Or rather, that I had long ago lost. That's because of the betrayal of my former church's minister. He did something very horrible, deeply harmed my wife and my faith. I want to believe in God, and I find myself feeling His presence, but there's just some little part of me that keeps looking for a scientific explanation. I'd love input and constructive ideas. What on earth did I see? Back when I was 6 or 7, my parents, my brother, and I had just moved into a rental in Oregon. It was the point in the move where we had almost all the boxes in the house. They were stacked high in each room. My parents, for reasons I can't remember, decided to leave for a very short time, taking my brother with them, but leaving me alone. I was walking through the one-story house, looking at each room and enjoying finally having some time alone when I got to my parents' room. To help you visualize this room, it had French doors, that's double doors, leading to their room with windows in them. Both doors were wide open to allow plenty of room to put large furniture in. As you walk in, you had a bathroom to the left, a window on the furthest wall from the door. It was late afternoon, so the light was shining in, but not quite casting shadows on the floor, but before I walked in, I saw movement in the light. As I stood in the door, I watched as an all-white silhouette of a small boy, about 3 or 4, walks toward me. I remember he was walking at a normal walking speed, but his movements looked like he was walking in slow motion. I, of course, got scared. I ran to my parents' couch, hid my face, and when I got up again, I was gone and I never saw it again. The house was a new build, and we were the second people to live in it. The first being people who built it. To this day, I haven't another experience, and my husband's family moved into that rental years after. They've never seen or felt anything. It's been years, and I can't find anything similar to what I saw, so does anybody know what that was? He's watching over me. So I've always believed in the supernatural. I always found it very interesting. I didn't really think I'd experience any paranormal experiences, as my parents were Christians and would always take me to church, so I thought that I'd be protected by God from the supernatural. That is until I experienced my first encounter. I was, very young, but the memory is very vivid to me. My dad had to go to work that night, so it was only my mom and brother and me at home. Everything was normal until I went to bed. I, as a child, had many sleep problems, some that I still deal with to this day. I'm also a light sleeper, so the smallest sounds would wake me up and it would take me ages to get back to sleep. Something I would do a lot is putting the blanket over my head, and for a reason it would just help me sleep better. So I slept with my parents at this time because they didn't want me suffocating from the blanket when I fell asleep. I didn't know what time it was, but I felt some pulling the blanket off my head. I opened my eyes. I saw some shoes in front of me. I was about to look up at it, but then somebody spoke to me and told me not to. Told me to turn the other way. When I turned, I faced the mirror that's on my parents' wardrobe. I remember seeing somebody standing behind me in my bed. He was dressed very formally. Couldn't see his face, and the moment I didn't really question it was really if he was there, because maybe I was just half asleep. I don't remember how long we talked, but he talked to me until I fell asleep. I remember falling asleep to him just slowly patting my head and telling me that he's always here. Then I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning and told my mom about what happened. And since my mom is of deep faith, she just chalked it up to me being half asleep and making things up. But eventually, she took me to the priest to bless me, as I guess she thought the devil's possessing me and stuff. My brother experienced meeting the same person, but he was more hostile to my brother. My brother, as he got older, just said that he was a kid and he was probably bored and relating strange things he saw to things he just watched. I've told many people, but they don't believe. And some say they do, but I know they don't. I still see him around the house, but he's not as present anymore. He becomes more known when I'm sad or upset, or just feeling negative. I can feel him next to me when I'm sitting or just around me, especially when I'm alone. I find comfort in that. When I hit a low during the COVID lockdown, I remember for what felt like long hours in the night I experienced sleep paralysis. But I wasn't afraid, as he was just there in my room comforting me. I don't know who he is, and I don't really care if anybody believes me or not. I'm just happy that even if no one's here for me in this world, there's someone in the other for me. A friend, foe, or simple observer. When I was 6, I moved into this new house built around the 1950s in a big town. Less than 10,000 people. When I was 7 or 8, I started staying home alone. Throughout the summer, I'd be alone from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. most days. Spend my days doing what normal kids in the late 2000s did, which is watch DVD Barbie movies and wash dishes. Activities related for later. While I would be home alone, I could feel something watching me. It wasn't a physical person, but I don't know where a legit paranormal subreddit is, otherwise known as I'm New. When I was on my living room couch and my outside facing sink, I could feel something there staring, like a sixth sense. And my eyes would just wander over for a split second, and I'd turn around to the sink, see it there, blink, and it's gone. Quote-unquote, he would always be in the same doorway peeking over the side door frame. He had black leather gloves and brown leather mask. Had no holes divided in 3 horizontal sections. This happened on and off for 2 months. Then I had a breakdown that I was seeing and hearing things. And about the hearing things, I'd be alone in my room practicing piano, and I would hear my name called right at my bedroom door. It'd just be my name over and over again, and I'd just keep leaving my room to see if my parents needed me for something. They would be in the kitchen, or maybe even on the couch. I went through some abuse later, and I went to the hospital due to depression. I heard my name called out really loudly when I was about to sleep. I went straight to the nurse, and they gave me a pill to help me sleep because I was pretty shook. Never heard it again. Really, I'm just here if maybe somebody could either relate or help me interpret this. If anybody has more questions or needs something explained a little more, I don't know how Redditors do it. Respond. Ghost child in late grandma's house. For 2 years, I lived in the house with my husband, now my ex, and our 3 daughters. This house had belonged to his grandma, who had lived there for over 50 years and raised her 3 sons there. The house is a huge ranch-style home with a basement, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2 different living rooms, fireplace, an old grand piano. Sounds awesome. It's very outdated when we moved in, with lots of grandma's stuff still there. Mostly trinkets, books, etc., and the flooring and the paint and wallpaper haven't been updated since the 70s. When Grandma was alive, she loved visitors and would talk passionately about her home, telling you how hard she worked to keep the house after her husband left, and saying specifically, "I never want to leave this house." Meaning that she never wanted to go to a retirement home. And she never did, as she died there after complications of a stroke stemming from what turned out to be unnecessary heart surgery. My ex decided to buy the house, and so we moved in. I had never had paranormal experiences before, and I just wanted to share what we experienced, as I still don't know what to make of it. Didn't really believe in ghosts before this. The first time was after we put the kids to bed. We were folding laundry together. We both very clearly heard footsteps, sounded like footsteps, or maybe a child or a toddler. It was in the opposing room, and we just looked at each other thinking it was one of the kids out of bed. So he yelled, "Go back to sleep." With no response, we walked in and no one was there. Kids are asleep in bed. It was definitely a bit unnerving and confusing, but maybe not scary. The next time was when I got home late at night. I heard Grandma's jewelry box that sings a song when opening going off in the back bedroom. I knew I had to turn it off, as it was going to wake up the kids, and sure enough, it was just going off, not opened or provoked at all. Next was the strangest. It was very early in the morning. I was starting to wake up, but still half asleep in bed. My partner at the time was up and had the lights on. We were preparing to go on a trip that day. I was getting irritated as my kids were yelling, "Mom, Mom," from all the way across the house from their rooms. So I'm kind of groaning about it, and my ex was finally like, "What?" I said, "Why are the kids yelling all the way across the house? They know not to do that." First he said, "What are you talking about?" But abruptly stopped as we both heard another, "Mom." He acknowledged it and went to check on them. Discovered them all still sleeping in their beds. Could not have been the neighbors, as we can't hear them inside, and it was very early. I sometimes wonder, who was I hearing? And I wonder if that experience was real. What else is? I was told I had 2 entities following me. Hello. A while back, somebody I was friends with told me that when I came over to visit that I had 2 beings following me. This person also told me they sometimes knew things and saw spirits. I'm a semi-skeptical person when it comes to this stuff, but I ask questions anyway. I was hoping maybe some of you could give me some input. They said that one of these beings was an older Hispanic woman, and apparently she was upset that I was visiting my friend and kept entering and leaving the room to check what we were doing. They asked if my grandmother had died. That's because I'm part Hispanic, but I didn't know at the time for sure. Haven't had anything to do with that side of my family since I was a kid. Later found out my grandmother from my Hispanic side wasn't dead at the time. I told them that the grandmother I was raised by was white and my mother was white and adopted. They also told me the other being was a tall man in black wearing a hat, and he was in the background just checking things out. When they told me this, I got a mental image of a man in a suit and a hat in like 60s or 50s type, like Men in Black type clothing. Whenever I questioned them more about this, as I did several times, they would just tell me the man in black seemed fine, and just an observer, but to watch out for the older Hispanic lady. Anybody have any thoughts on this? My immediate reaction is maybe to semi-dismiss it, but I do have a curious side of me from time to time. I've had some weird instances and things happen in life, but I always keep both an open mind and a skeptical mind when dealing with the unknown. Likewise. I have always had a healthy respect for the paranormal, but this is the reason I now know to fear it. Let me start this off by saying paranormal is normal for my family. So ghosts, spirits, spooks, whatever you'd like to call them, they've never been a taboo subject. Well, at least for us. Growing up, you see something, you tell someone, and everyone listens and gives advice. I grew up never really being afraid of the paranormal and was taught to be respectful. My whole life I've experienced paranormal activity, so it happens and I move on until my senior year of high school. Again, I was taught to respect the dead, so I've never gone ghost hunting or tried messing with spirits, really anything of the sort. If you do, that's fine, I was just taught not to. To each their own. Senior year, I was given an assignment to find ancestors in town and see how far back you can find relatives. My grandmother told me and my cousin, a junior at the time, about an old cemetery that she believed a cousin was buried in, and how to get there. So we go and find her grave, and we get the information. We thanked her for allowing us to get to her tombstone, information, and to rest in peace. The whole time we were there, my cousin and I felt very off, like we were being watched, and not in a good way. As if there's a good way. Go home, and everything's fine until I go to bed and have the same feeling. I'm laying in bed, but staring at my door into this hallway and feeling as if someone is there watching me. This continues for months. I thought I was the only one who noticed until my brother, 10 at the time, starts asking me if he can sleep in my room with me because he's scared of the hallway. He told me he felt like someone was watching him from the hallway and it felt bad. I agreed it was not a pleasant energy. Like what a family member, or maybe just a spirit passing through, feels like. This was a dark, eerie feeling. Told him that was fine, and we both laid in my bed, stared at the hallway, and just felt eyes on us. We both said the Lord's Prayer and went to bed. We're not a super religious family, but me and my brother felt at that moment we needed to say the prayer. I graduated high school, things calmed down. The feelings seemed to go away. Until that morning. My mom went to work, my brother went to school. I got up, got in the shower, and as I was washing my hair, this heavy feeling just crashed down on me. I felt I was being watched. Turned my head to look at the side, and there on the other side of the distorted glass shower door was a tall, dark figure. I could see head and shoulders, but no other features except the red eyes. I screamed, threw open the shower door, and it was gone quickly, getting dressed, wrapping my shampooed hair in a towel, leaving the house, going straight to my grandmother's, and told her, bawling. She looked as scared as I did. My grandmother believes it was a shadow person. Me and my mother had been fighting a lot, as well as full-blown screaming matches, which we never did before the trip to the cemetery. Grandma called my mom, and they called someone to cleanse our house. I never went back, and I moved out. My mom sold the house, and I still get horrible feelings when I drive by it. That's my worst paranormal experience, but I have years of stories, and I'm currently 29, so there are a lot. If anybody wants more, I can post more, but honestly, be careful where you go and what you bring home. I had no idea who or what it was, but I'm terrified of that house. Took almost a year before I stopped having panic attacks in the shower. I've told only family and a couple of friends about this experience, but I was told this Reddit page would be the perfect place for it. Overnight at my aunt's home. I just want to share a haunting, and my first brush with the paranormal. It's when I was 12 years old. My house is adjacent to my aunt's house, formerly the previous generation's home until they went on their separate ways after college, and my grandparents moved to the province, leaving it to my aunt. Since I don't have my own room, my parents, younger brother, and I sleep in the same bedroom in our one-story studio-type house. So, I would usually sleep over whenever there's a room available, if my cousins or her are out, since I want to have privacy at times to play video games without being nagged about bedtime, or to take a look at the stuff in my male classmates call. Or to take a look at the stuff my male classmates call. And I'm going to, well, you know what they're talking about. Starts with a P, ends with an N. My cousins think their house is haunted since people were supposedly tortured nearby during World War II before the house was built. According to his classmates who lived in the neighboring streets, who in turn point to their grandparents as the source of the story. My aunt, on the other hand, dismisses them, and would often scold us for thinking that someone died there. Same with my parents. According to them, they've lived in the house since they were born and never felt, heard, or saw anything paranormal. When we asked my grandparents, all they knew was that it's a junkyard. That was when they bought it in a lot in the 70s after escaping from Vietnam. Never asked the previous owner about his past. Although they urged me to pray when sleeping over, just to be safe. As for me, I didn't experience anything save for loud footsteps in the hallway during dawn, which I just attribute to others in the household going to the bathroom or maybe for a snack downstairs. That is, until I was home alone for the first time. My aunt, cousins, and parents went to our province to bond with my grandparents. I didn't go since there's nothing to do there. Once they've left, I've locked all the doors and windows and set the alarms before going to my aunt's room. Right next to the bed is a television screen. That's where I can watch our CCTVs. Sorry, something spooked me. After checking the premises, I just played video games and watched a bit of Japanese you-know-what-ski until 3 a.m. I went to the bathroom before sleeping, where I passed by hanged laundry. I could have sworn seeing silhouettes wearing the clothes and just standing there. However, I just continued with my business and thought nothing of it. Must have been my imagination since I'm sleepy, and I've read somewhere that the mind can play tricks with the sense in the dark. I was suddenly awakened by loud footsteps in the hallway, and around 3 knocks on the bedroom door an hour later. Fearing someone broke into the house, I took my aunt's .45 caliber and butterfly knife. I checked the CCTVs. Everything's clear inside, all the doors and windows are intact. So are the walls. There's nothing on the other side but complete darkness. On the yard, there's nothing but frogs, which have made it their home for some reason. I looked at the crack at the bottom of the door and I saw feet barely covered by what seems to be a white dress outside. So standing in front of the bedroom, it seems. I could have opened the peephole to see who it might be, but my gut tells me I shouldn't, so I didn't. Called my aunt, but no answer. Thought of doing the same to my parents, but for fear of being reprimanded for still being awake at 4 a.m., it just took over. As for the police, they told me I'm just imagining things and hung up. They had a bad reputation in my country for being abusive and lazy slobs. So with nowhere to find help, I just pushed the chairs in the room toward the door, placed whatever I could on top, covered myself in bed, and hoped for the best. Whatever's outside, hopefully, started stomping back and forth across the hall. Oh, excuse me, it's the opposite of that. It was as if it was having a tantrum, and by some miracle, I eventually fell asleep. Last thing I remembered was still seeing nothing on the CCTV in the hall. When I woke up around noon, I saw the lights in the house, except in the room where I'm in. They're open. Told my aunt and parents what happened, got them to admit that the house is indeed haunted. How? Well, the concerned neighbor who lives at the end of our street asked them who was the girl in white she saw pacing around inside my aunt's house on the 2nd floor on her way back to work around 5 a.m. As it turns out, my aunt and mom dabbled in witchcraft in their younger days out of curiosity after hearing it bring them good fortune in school, perhaps even gain the attention of their crushes. Oy vey. Must have attracted some elementals during their rituals, which they would prefer for the kids not to know, since they're kind of gradually in the process of having them removed from the houses. Apparently, that's the reason my grandparents had the trees in the yard cut down. The yard itself cemented, incense burning on most nights, and priests and fellow practitioners visiting regularly to check up on things that, at least while we were at school or on vacation. I continued my sleepovers, although I have the lights in the hallway and the restroom turned on in the other rooms, and not really sleeping and locked from the outside when I'm alone. The activity eventually ceased in about a year later, which is 2005. Although they seemed to return in the form of footsteps or unintelligible whispers in the hallway and stairs late at dawn during Halloween and All Saints' Day, at years ending in odd numbers. Except last year. We've just ignored their visits as long as they don't hurt anyone, and we don't see any full-bodied or any type of apparitions. It's nice of them to stop when someone's going to and from the bathroom or downstairs. As for why it took 20 years for the elementals to be removed, or at least have their presence reduced to visits, according to another practitioner, it seems every time a horror story is told verbally in the house, which is almost every Halloween, the elementals are convinced to stay longer. Thus, it's been forbidden to do so ever since 2004 for good measure. If my cousins want to tell ghost stories or watch paranormal stuff, they just go to our house to do so or use headphones. Ours is safe and spared from paranormal activity in my aunt's house, supposedly because my mom buried some kind of charm below our living room that she bought from church before taking the nursing board decades ago. Well, if you get more haunted for telling ghost stories, I am not in a good position. A dream that came true. I still can't believe it, and I'm still trying to make connections. So I have a dream about my professor. He's wearing all black. We're in class, but this is a completely different class from the lecture hall. All the desks are bunched together on one side of the room away from the left wall. So I talked to my friend, and she's pretty excited about a video that we're going to watch. And we watched the video. It's horrendous. Everyone's standing still, so I'm like, what the heck is going on? And then he passes out permission slips to hypnotize us. Before I have time to react, this blonde lady comes from behind me and snaps her fingers at me. I'm in the left wall, and so is everyone else. Everyone is dead asleep. I'm somewhat awake, but I'm a bit out of it. I try grabbing for my professor as he walks around, but I can't. The lady goes down the row of people sitting on the wall, and she puts a locust in people's mouths. She came to me. I was the only one, so I think to refuse it. Dream ends. Nasty. Fast forward a couple of days later. I go to class like usual. I hear voices telling me to straight up leave that classroom, but of course, thinking I was crazy, I just stay. So, he shows us a couple of videos. In this last video, it's literally a bunch of strobing lights. There were words and phrases said every so often. I tried to cover my eyes. After class, everyone was acting weird as if they were hypnotized. I was in a daze. I asked about my assignment and left. Later on, I looked up if that's how you, hypnotize a mass amount of people. And that is how you can do it, using strobing lights to induce a hypnotic trance. I was having a major anxiety attack, and I said to myself, I need to get out of Dodge, as soon as possible. So I leave and I start heading to my car. A crow comes and sits on a pole and caws at me. I was thinking to myself, maybe I should get back and tell him that those strobing lights could have given someone a seizure. I see him over by his car watching me. I tell him, he apologizes. I go home, feels like someone or something is with me in this car now. Fast forward a few days. That's after all my crazy awakening things. I feel this heavy presence surround me, and I confirmed it through a psychic who was watching my energy at the time that something was there. I don't know what it was for sure, but it was mad at me and it felt like it was talking through a psychic channel. I convinced it to go away. It comes back and wants me gone, like gone. I had to sage the entire house. So I have my own conclusions about what happened that year, but not completely everything. Wonder what you guys think. I'm hoping I'm not completely nuts. I don't know the name of what I was dealing with. A few years ago in 2019, a friend of mine was going through some paranormal oppression by something that he had brought onto himself. He did so by making a shrine in his closet and praying to whatever it was. He described this spirit as a man with no face and a top hat. My friend performed self-harm on himself because he said it told him to. When he did this, it was years ago, and he had been dealing with it up until he asked me and another friend for help. We went to a friend's apartment before we went to his parents' house. That's where he had conjured this being. He alerted my other friend that the demonic presence was there looking at him. At that specific time, we were around 8 or 10. Or rather, we were around 8 or 10 other people. Nobody saw it, not even me, but I felt that heavy feeling on my shoulders. We went to his house to try and find the root. This was before I knew he had prayed to it. Well, prayed to it in his closet. So I went in uninformed a bit. The friend having the issues took us up to his room, and as I walked in, I saw a hand-painted picture of the likeness of Jesus Christ. It was, in fact, not Jesus Christ. I could just feel it. So the oppressed friend is walking around freaking out, and the friend helping me pulls out her Bible. We're Christians, and believe that this was the best way to get rid of such an entity. Before she begins to pray, I walk close to the open closet. I don't remember moving back at all, but I ended up against the dressed, well, I'm assuming they mean dresser, good 7 or 8 feet away from the closet, so pretty much on the other side of the room. I felt this overwhelming fight or flight, and since you can't physically fight demons, look at me trying to save face and masculinity, I left the room. They both came down after. The oppressed friend was fine, and the friend that took over after I'd left had physical tears coming out of her eyes. A few months later, we reconnect with said friend, and he says that he's accepted that this thing will be in his life, and he's done trying to wish it away, as he put it. I don't know what that thing was. Never saw a physical manifestation, but it bothers me. Still put the fear of God in me, for lack of a better phrase. If anybody has had a similar experience, no matter how big or small, please let me know what you experienced. Maybe there's some sort of connection. Unknown whistler. I thought it was about time I started sharing the odd things that happened to me. This event goes back a few years to an apartment that we lived in. It was a house split into 2 apartments. We lived on the bottom floor. I should note that it was normal for my husband to go upstairs and hang out with them for a while, leaving me alone. Plus, the part of the building it took place in wouldn't have had anyone walking around outside. While in the bathroom, I heard somebody walk into the kitchen, start to whistle a tune. I could hear them opening cupboards, and of course, assuming my husband had come back. The whistling stopped for a few seconds. Then they started the tune from the beginning. They stopped again, cutting the tune short, and started again after a few seconds. At this point, I noticed that it sounded the same, and I mean exactly the same. This happened a couple more times. each time the tune getting shorter until it was nothing but them reaping the same first note over and over, fast succession. That was while getting close to the bathroom. I looked at the door handle. I tried to brace it so nothing could open it. The whistler got faster and faster, then held the last note at an unhuman-like pitch that distorted. The note was held for so long I thought it would be trapped in the bathroom until someone came down. Then silence. I'm not sure how long I paced around the bathroom for before I got up the nerve to open the door, but it felt like a while. Whenever I'm by myself and hear whistling, it makes me freeze in place, hoping it's not gonna come back. Skinwalker/Wendigo. Another two events that happened to me in the same flat as the whistler. This one thing has to be the worst by far. It's hard to describe the sense of dread and fear that this thing gave off. It honestly felt like my life was at risk and my whole body would scream to run. Anytime I would hear this thing, I was alone, which of course just made it all worse. One night the dog was outside barking, so I got up and went out to look. As I was looking outside, the dog went back in and left me alone standing in the dark next to the shed. I soon became aware of noises in the shed, but I put it down to wind. That is, until it moved closer, and I felt a strong sense of dread. I listened to the sound. It sounds like a Persian on all fours scuffling around. I heard it move toward the shed door, so I ran inside and slammed the door. I sat down. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind again. At first, the dread was going away, but then I could feel it building up again. It felt like it was trying to find a way in, moving back and forth along the walls of the house, and then I suddenly felt it inside the apartment. It had gotten to the kitchen. Not sure how, maybe the window. I could feel it getting slowly closer. I was too scared to look behind me into the kitchen, but I managed to jump up and slam the door. I hoped it would leave, and it did. After this, I would hear it sometimes, just scuffling around at night. The alley in the back was dark and smelly, so I assumed it liked it. Now, this next bit is truly a fault on my own part. Really should have listened to my own gut feeling. Months later, it's summer, and therefore very warm. Or, it summer and therefore very warm, okay? So I had the back door open. I was on my laptop, and it had got dark. At some point, I turned the light on and sat back down. I sat facing the back door. My laptop screen stopped me from seeing the bottom half of that door. After a while, I started hearing movement outside and felt uneasy, but I told myself it was nothing. Yep, I sat there, told myself I was being stupid. The feeling grew stronger and stronger, my whole body screaming at me to run. Then her dog, coming running downstairs, stops in the middle of the room, looks at me, and then goes to walk outside. The way she did this was just odd. I pulled down my screen and watched her head toward the back door. As she walked out the back door, there was this thing. Some humanoid figure crouched down by the door. Its skin a dark brown, like dirt and rot with the texture of a burn victim. Hairless, skinny, like it hadn't eaten in months. There it was. This thing I'd been in fear of so long, right up against the doorframe. It was trying to make its way inside. The figure twisted its emaciated form round to follow her dog. It was crouched down onto its hands and feet. That's why it made that scuffling noise. I jumped up, threw my laptop to the floor, ran upstairs, refused to go back down alone. The stupidest thing was that I doubted myself. And if it wasn't for the dog, then I don't know what would have happened. Her look towards when she came downstairs, I can only imagine she was wondering why I wasn't running away. Afraid it sounded like a My computer had a weird thing happen. A friend told me it sounds like a skinwalker, and that Europe does have accounts of such things. I don't know what it was. I'm so happy we moved. And hopefully you're happy you made it to the very end. Unless it's the compilation video. See ya.